My sister got everything handed to her growing up: new cars, private school, the works. Then at Thanksgiving dinner, she found out I had $30 million and had a complete meltdown in front of everyone. My aunt screamed, and my dad just. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions. My sister Madison was born first, and from the moment she entered the world, she became the golden child. I came along 3 years later, apparently an accident my mother mentioned more than once during arguments with my father. The difference in how we were treated wasn't subtle. It was glaring, constant, and shaped every single day of my childhood. Madison got enrolled in Westlake Academy, a prestigious private school where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary. I went to Roosevelt Public High School, where the ceiling tiles had water stains and the textbooks were older than I was. When Madison turned 16, Dad bought her a brand new BMW 3 Series in pearl white. I got a bus pass and my mother's rusted Honda Civic from 1998 that broke down twice a month. Madison's college education at Stanford was paid in full. I worked 3 jobs to afford community college before transferring to a state school on scholarships I'd earned myself. The excuses were always the same. Madison needs to focus on her studies. Your sister has such potential. We're investing in Madison's future. What they really meant was that Madison was worth investing in, and I wasn't. My parents, Richard and Susan, made their priorities crystal clear. My father ran a moderately successful accounting firm, and my mother worked as a real estate agent. They had money. They just chose to spend it exclusively on one daughter. I stopped asking for things around age 12. Madison got a trip to Europe for her high school graduation. I requested help with my college applications and got told to figure it out myself. She received a monthly allowance that exceeded what I made working weekends at the grocery store. Her closet overflowed with designer clothes while I shopped at thrift stores and learned to alter garments to fit properly. Christmas mornings were particularly brutal. Madison would open gift after gift while I'd get maybe 1 or 2 practical items like socks or a discount store sweater. The worst part wasn't the material difference. It was watching my parents' faces light up when Madison walked into a room, then dim slightly when they noticed me. It was hearing my father brag about Madison's accomplishments to his colleagues while introducing me with a vague "this is my other daughter, Emily." It was my mother posting hundreds of photos of Madison on social media while having maybe a dozen of me, most from years ago. I developed this survival mechanism where I just became invisible. I stayed in my room, studied obsessively, and planned my escape. Madison thrived on attention and praise, always needing validation and constantly seeking reassurance that she was special. She'd throw tantrums if she didn't get exactly what she wanted, and my parents would bend over backward to accommodate her. Meanwhile, I learned self-reliance. I learned that depending on anyone would only lead to disappointment. After high school, I moved out as quickly as possible. I worked full-time while attending college, lived in a tiny studio apartment that barely had heating, and survived on ramen and whatever was on clearance at the supermarket. My parents didn't offer to help, and I didn't ask. Madison, meanwhile, lived in a luxury apartment near Stanford that Dad paid for, complete with a monthly stipend for expenses. She posted Instagram photos of weekend trips to wine country while I was picking up extra shifts during holiday breaks. I graduated with a degree in computer science and a minor in mathematics. I discovered I had a genuine aptitude for programming and problem solving. More importantly, I'd found something I loved that was entirely mine. I got a job at a tech startup in Austin, Texas, far away from my family in suburban Connecticut. The salary wasn't impressive initially, but the company gave equity to early employees. I lived frugally, saved aggressively, and taught myself about investing. The startup was called Vertex Solutions, and we were building inventory management software that used machine learning to predict supply chain needs. I was one of 12 initial employees, hired as a junior developer but quickly proving myself capable of much more. The founders, 2 former Amazon engineers named Chris and Jennifer, saw potential in me that my own parents never had. They promoted me twice in the first year, eventually making me lead developer for our core product. Austin became my sanctuary. I made genuine friends, people who knew nothing about my family history or the way I'd grown up. They just knew me as Emily, the programmer who was always down for tacos and terrible karaoke. I dated a few people casually, though I struggled with trust issues that probably stemmed from years of conditional love. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, helped me work through a lot of that baggage. I'd started seeing her after realizing that my childhood had left deeper scars than I wanted to admit. During those years, I call home maybe once every 2 months. The conversations were always the same. Mom would spend 5 minutes asking perfunctory questions about my life before launching into 30-minute updates about Madison's latest endeavors. Dad would get on briefly to ask about my computer job in a tone that suggested he didn't really understand or care what I did. Madison never asked to speak to me, and I never asked for her. I remember one particularly painful call during my second year in Austin. I'd just gotten my promotion to lead developer, a huge accomplishment that came with a significant raise. I was so proud, and some naive part of me still wanted to share it with my parents. When I told my mother, she said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and then immediately pivoted to telling me that Madison had been featured in a local newspaper article about young entrepreneurs. The article was about her failed jewelry business, framed as an inspiring story about taking risks. My mother read me the entire thing over the phone, her voice brimming with pride. I hung up and cried for the first time in years. Not because I was surprised, but because I'd let myself hope things might be different. Dr. Reynolds helped me process it in our next session, helping me see that I kept returning to this well expecting water when it had been dry my entire life. That conversation marked a turning point. I stopped trying to share my achievements with them. I stopped hoping for validation that would never come. The company grew steadily. We went from 12 employees to 50, then to over 100. With each funding round, my equity stake became more valuable on paper, though it was still theoretical money. I lived modestly, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate named Jessica who worked in nonprofit management. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, hers to reform criminal justice, mine to eventually start my own company focused on technology for social good. Meanwhile, Madison's life continued its chaotic trajectory. Through Aunt Patricia, who remained my main source of family information, I heard about Madison's string of wealthy boyfriends, each relationship ending dramatically. There was the investment banker who broke up with her after she maxed out a credit card he'd given her for emergencies. The real estate developer who caught her lying about having a job. The trust fund kid who finally saw through her manufactured persona. Each breakup resulted in her moving back home, requiring parental support, and eventually bouncing back with a new scheme or pursuit. My parents funded it all. They paid for her life coaching certification that she never used. They bankrolled her attempt to become a personal stylist, which lasted 3 months. They covered the costs when she decided to get a master's degree in communications, only for her to drop out after 1 semester because the classes were too demanding. The money flowed endlessly from their accounts to hers, subsidizing a lifestyle she couldn't afford and enabling behavior that kept her dependent. Madison graduated from Stanford and moved back home. She couldn't find a job that met her standards, which, apparently meant nothing that required actual effort. My parents supported her completely, never pressuring her to become independent. She dabbled in various pursuits, a brief attempt at becoming an influencer, a failed jewelry design business that Dad funded, some vague consulting work that never materialized into anything concrete. Meanwhile, I was working 70-hour weeks, learning everything I could, and slowly building something. The tech startup I joined started gaining serious traction. Our software revolutionized inventory management for e-commerce businesses, and suddenly we had major clients. Companies like Wayfair, Target, and several major fashion retailers were using our platform. We were processing billions of dollars in inventory data, and our algorithms were saving clients millions in reduced waste and optimized storage costs. The company went through several funding rounds, and my equity stake, which I'd held onto despite opportunities to cash out small amounts, grew exponentially in value. During Series B funding, several colleagues sold portions of their equity. I'd been tempted. The money would have been life-changing even then, probably around $200,000. But something told me to hold on. Chris and Jennifer believed we were building something special, and I trusted their vision. Series C brought in even more money, and the valuation climbed into the hundreds of millions. By this point, Vertex Solutions was being talked about in tech publications as one of the most promising B2B software companies in the supply chain space. Recruiters from major tech companies started reaching out to me on LinkedIn, offering substantial salaries to jump ship. I stayed loyal to Vertex, partly because I believed in what we were doing, and partly because I'd built something there that felt like family, the kind of supportive, appreciative family I'd never had growing up. Then the acquisition talks started. A Fortune 500 corporation that specialized in enterprise software had been watching our growth. They wanted to integrate our technology into their existing platform and were willing to pay handsomely for it. The negotiations took months. I wasn't involved in those discussions, but the energy in the office shifted. People whispered in conference rooms. The founders held all-hands meetings where they carefully didn't promise anything but hinted that something big was coming. The day the acquisition was announced, I was in a meeting with my team when Chris and Jennifer called everyone to the main floor. They looked exhausted but elated. The deal was done. The numbers they shared made people gasp. For the founders, this was a life-changing exit that would set them up for generations. For employees like me who'd been there from the beginning, it was substantial enough that financial advisors would need to be involved. The actual closing took another 6 weeks, legal reviews, regulatory approvals, all the corporate machinery grinding through the process. During that time, I couldn't quite wrap my mind around what was coming. My financial advisor, whom I'd hired specifically to help me understand the situation, had run the numbers multiple times. With my equity stake, the vesting schedule, and the acquisition price, I was looking at somewhere between $28 and $32 million after taxes, depending on various factors. When the wire transfer finally hit my account, I sat in my living room at 2 a.m, having logged into my bank app for the 15th time to confirm it was real. The number sat there, undeniable, $30,247,812. I'd gone from someone who'd worried about grocery money just a few years earlier to someone who would never have to worry about money again. I called Jessica into the room. She knew what was happening, and we just stared at my phone screen together, speechless. I didn't tell anyone. For months, I simply let the money sit there while I processed what had happened. I continued working because the acquiring company wanted to retain key personnel, and honestly, I enjoyed my job. I built a life in Austin that I loved, good friends, a nice apartment downtown, hobbies and interests I cultivated. The money felt surreal, like something that might disappear if I acknowledged it too loudly. Eventually, I did start making changes, but subtle ones. I bought a beautiful house in the hills with a view of the lake. I hired a financial advisor and an attorney to help me manage everything properly. I set up trusts and charitable foundations. I invested in index funds and real estate. I made sure I'd be set for life, and that I could make a genuine difference for causes I cared about. But I drove a normal car, dressed in regular clothes, and didn't broadcast my situation. The people I worked with knew I'd done well from the acquisition, but the full extent remained private. My relationship with my family had become minimal. I called my parents on holidays, visited maybe once a year for a day or two, and kept conversations surface level. Madison and I barely spoke. She'd occasionally text asking for favors or money, which I'd politely decline. My parents seemed content with this arrangement, focused entirely on managing Madison's life and her various crises. She'd gone through several failed relationships, blown through money faster than they could give it to her, and generally existed in this perpetual state of chaos that somehow always required parental intervention. Then came the invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. My mother called, which was unusual since we typically communicated via brief text messages. She insisted I come home for the holiday, mentioning that Aunt Patricia would be there with her family, along with my Uncle Jim and his wife Sarah. There would be a real family gathering for the first time in years. Something in her voice made me hesitate, but I eventually agreed. It had been almost 2 years since I'd seen everyone, and despite everything, some small part of me still craved connection with my family. I flew into Hartford and rented a car. I'd booked a hotel room rather than staying at my parents' house, claiming I had work calls scheduled that might disturb everyone. The truth was I couldn't stomach the idea of sleeping under their roof, in my old room that had probably been converted into storage for Madison's excess belongings. When I pulled up to the house on Thanksgiving morning, the familiar sight of the colonial-style home stirred complicated emotions. Madison's new Audi sat in the driveway, a gift from Dad for her 28th birthday. She'd crashed the BMW 3 years ago, and naturally, it had been immediately replaced. Inside, the house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon. My mother greeted me with a stiff hug, immediately commenting that I looked tired and asking if I was eating enough. Madison appeared from the living room, her outfit clearly expensive, her hair professionally styled. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain, taking in my simple jeans and sweater. "Emily. Wow, you actually came. Still living in Texas?" She said it like Texas was some backward wasteland rather than a booming metropolitan area. "Still there. I love Austin." I kept my voice neutral. "That's sweet. Some people are just built for simpler lives." She smiled, saccharine and condescending. "I'm actually about to close on a condo in Manhattan. Dad's helping with the down payment, but it's mostly my investment. I've been consulting for several major fashion brands, so the income is finally where it needs to be." I knew for a fact she wasn't consulting for anyone. My mother had mentioned during a brief phone call that Madison was once again unemployed and living off their financial support. But I just nodded and moved past her into the kitchen where Mom was frantically preparing food. Aunt Patricia arrived with her husband Tom and their 2 kids, followed shortly by Uncle Jim and Aunt Sarah. The house filled with noise and activity, everyone catching up and kids running around. Patricia cornered me at one point, asking about my life with genuine interest. She'd always been kinder to me than my parents, though she'd never directly confronted them about their blatant favoritism. "You look good, Emily. Really good, actually. There's something different about you." She studied my face carefully. "I'm happy. Life is good." It was the truest thing I'd said all day. Dinner was the usual elaborate affair. My mother had gone all out with multiple courses, expensive wine, and a table decorated like something from a magazine spread. Dad sat at the head of the table, Madison to his right in the place of honor. I ended up between Uncle Jim and one of Patricia's teenagers. The conversation flowed around me as people discussed jobs, politics, and family gossip. Madison dominated the discussion, as always. She talked extensively about her plans for the Manhattan condo, describing the neighborhood, the amenities, and her vision for decorating. She mentioned several expensive furniture pieces she planned to buy, throwing around designer names casually. My father beamed at her, adding comments about what a smart investment it was and how proud he was of her initiative. "Madison has always had such sophisticated taste," Mom said, refilling wine glasses. "She knows quality when she sees it. That's why we made sure she had the right education and opportunities. It's paying off now." The implied comparison hung in the air. Madison caught my eye and smirked slightly, enjoying her moment in the spotlight. I focused on my food, counting down the hours until I could leave. Then Aunt Patricia asked the question that changed everything. "So Emily, how's your career going? Still with that tech company?" "Actually, we were acquired earlier this year. It's been a transition, but positive overall." I kept it vague, hoping the conversation would move on. "Acquired? What does that mean?" Patricia leaned forward, genuinely interested. "A larger company bought us out. It's common in the tech industry." I took a sip of water, trying to signal this wasn't a big topic. But Uncle Jim picked up the thread. "Wait, you were with a startup, right? Did you have equity?" There wasn't a good way to deflect. "Yes, early employees received stock options." "And the acquisition?" Jim was a financial consultant, so he understood the implications immediately. "That must have been a significant windfall. Those early startup stakes can be worth serious money." The table had gone quiet, everyone suddenly tuned into the conversation. Madison's smile had frozen on her face. My father was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It worked out well. I tried to downplay it, but the damage was done. "How well?" Madison's voice had an edge to it. "Like, what are we talking? 100,000? I could have lied. I could have minimized it. But something in her tone, the automatic assumption that whatever I'd accomplished would be inferior to anything she could achieve, made me pause. I was tired of being invisible. Tired of being treated like I was worth less. Tired of pretending that my success didn't matter because acknowledging it might upset the family dynamic. More than that. I met her eyes directly. "Like $500,000? She laughed, clearly thinking that was an absurd ceiling. "More. $1 million? My father spoke now, his voice sharp. "You made $1 million? "More than that, Dad." The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Aunt Patricia's eyes were wide. Uncle Jim was nodding slowly, like pieces were clicking into place. My mother had stopped moving entirely, frozen with a serving spoon in midair. Madison's face had gone pale. How much more? I could feel the weight of the moment. All those years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as an afterthought. All the times Madison had been celebrated for the bare minimum while my actual accomplishments went unnoticed. Something inside me, some final restraint, simply snapped. The acquisition was for a substantial amount, and early employee equity stakes translated to significant payouts. After taxes and everything else, I cleared just over $30 million. The silence was deafening. Then everything exploded at once. Madison stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash. Her face had gone from pale to bright red, her hands shaking. "You're lying. You're fucking lying. There's no way, you didn't, that's impossible." Madison, language. My mother's automatic response, even in her shock. Language? Language? Madison was shrieking now. She's sitting there claiming she has $30 million? $30 million. And you're worried about my language? My father had stood up too, his face ashen. "Emily, is this true? You have $30 million? "Yes, Dad. Give or take a few million depending on current market valuations of my remaining investments." Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Madison was pacing now, her hands in her hair. This can't be happening. This isn't real. She's making it up for attention. I'm not making anything up. I have documentation if you need proof, but I don't particularly care if you believe me or not. My voice stayed calm, which seemed to infuriate Madison further. Documentation? Documentation? She grabbed her wine glass, and for a moment I thought she might throw it. Do you know what I could do with that kind of money? Do you have any idea? And it went to you? To fucking Emily, who wore thrift store clothes and drove a piece of shit car? Madison, stop it right now. Patricia stood up, her voice commanding. You're having a meltdown over someone else's success. Do you hear yourself? But Madison was beyond reason. Years of entitlement and jealousy were pouring out in a toxic flood. She doesn't deserve it. She never deserved anything. I'm the one who went to Stanford. I'm the one who had potential. She went to some nothing state school and worked at some random startup. This isn't fair. Fair? The word came out of me harder than I intended. You want to talk about fair, Madison? You got a BMW at 16? I got a bus pass. You got Stanford fully paid. I worked 3 jobs and took out loans. You got a luxury apartment and a monthly allowance. I ate ramen in a studio with broken heating. Everything was handed to you on a silver platter your entire life, and you're standing there screaming about fairness because I actually worked for something and succeeded? My mother had started crying. Emily, honey, we didn't know, we never thought. You never thought I'd amount to anything? Yes, Mom, I'm aware. You made that crystal clear my entire childhood. The words were coming faster now, years of suppressed hurt breaking through. Every choice you made told me I wasn't worth investing in. Every time you praised Madison and ignored me, every time you bought her something expensive and gave me nothing, every time you forgot my birthday but threw Madison a party, all of it told me exactly what you thought of me. We were just trying to help Madison reach her potential. Dad's voice was desperate. She needed more support. She needed more support? I laughed, sharp and bitter. Or she was easier to love? Let's be honest about what actually happened. You favored one daughter over the other. You poured everything into Madison and left me to fend for myself. And you know what? Fine. I'm grateful for it now, because it taught me self-reliance. It taught me that I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. And that lesson, as painful as it was, helped me build something real. Madison had collapsed into her chair, sobbing dramatically. This is a nightmare. An actual nightmare. She can't have that much money. It's not possible. Tell me it's not possible. Aunt Sarah had moved to comfort my mother, while Uncle Jim was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Patricia's teenage daughter was recording on her phone until Patricia quietly told her to put it away. The whole thing was a disaster, but I felt strangely liberated. The truth was finally out. How long have you had this money? Dad asked, his voice hollow. 9 months, give or take. 9 months. He sat down heavily. You've had $30 million for 9 months and didn't tell us? Why would I? So Madison could ask me to fund her lifestyle? So you could finally decide I was worth your attention now that I have money? I didn't tell you because my relationship with this family has been essentially non existent by your design. You made it clear what I was worth to you. That didn't change just because my bank account did. That's not fair. Mom was openly crying now. We love you, Emily. We've always loved you. You love me? The question came out softer than I intended. When? When did you love me, Mom? When you forgot to come to my high school graduation because Madison had a dental appointment. When you told Aunt Patricia I was going through a phase when I made the dean's list. When you sent Madison to Europe and told me I should be grateful for what I had. When did that love show up, exactly? Silence. She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. Madison suddenly lunged at me across the table. Patricia and Tom caught her before she could reach me, but she was screaming, completely unhinged. I hate you. I've always hated you. You were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to stay nothing. This was supposed to be my life. Mine. Madison, Jesus Christ. Patricia was struggling to hold her back. Get control of yourself. Let her go, I said quietly. She's not going to hurt me. She's just realizing that being handed everything her whole life didn't actually prepare her for the real world. That's not my fault. That's yours, Mom and Dad. You did this to her. You created someone so entitled and so fragile that someone else's success feels like a personal attack. My father's face had crumbled. He suddenly looked much older than his 62 years. We made mistakes. We can see that now. But Emily, you have to understand. I don't have to understand anything. I spent my entire childhood trying to understand why I wasn't enough. Why I wasn't worth the same love and investment as Madison. I'm done trying to understand. I'm done hoping things will change. This dinner just confirmed what I already knew: this family is toxic, and I'm better off without it. I stood up, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. Madison had stopped struggling and was now just crying, mascara running down her face. Mom was shaking her head repeatedly, like she could deny what was happening. Dad stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Emily, please don't go. Aunt Patricia's voice was gentle. I know this is awful, but I'm not angry at you, Patricia. You've always been kind to me. But I can't stay here. This was a mistake from the start. I grabbed my purse from the side table. For what it's worth, I'm doing well. I'm happy. I have good friends, a career I love, and yes, financial security. I built a life that works for me, without any help from the people who were supposed to support me. I don't need your approval or your love anymore. I stopped needing that a long time ago. I walked toward the door, and my mother's voice stopped me. What do we do now? How do we fix this? I turned back to look at her. She looked broken, desperate, like she was finally seeing the consequences of decades of choices. You can't fix this, Mom. This isn't something you can solve with a conversation or an apology. You built this family dynamic brick by brick, choice by choice, year by year. Madison's meltdown isn't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. The problem is that you raised her to believe she was inherently more valuable than me, and now she can't cope with reality. The problem is that you spent my entire childhood showing me I didn't matter, and now you're surprised I've built a life that doesn't include you. We can change. Dad's voice cracked. We can do better. Maybe you can. But I'm not interested in finding out. I needed parents who believed in me when I was 12, 15, 18. I needed support when I was struggling to afford textbooks and working multiple jobs. I needed you to show up for me even once with the same energy you showed up for Madison constantly. That time has passed. I became who I am despite you, not because of you, and I'm proud of that. But it means we don't have a relationship worth salvaging. Madison had gone quiet, staring at me with red-rimmed eyes. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been understanding flicker across her face. But then it was gone, replaced by resentment and bitterness. I walked out the door into the cold November evening. Behind me, I could hear renewed sobbing and raised voices, but I didn't look back. I got in my rental car and drove away from that house, that family, that entire chapter of my life. The hotel room was quiet when I returned. I ordered room service, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from my mother, calls from my father, a series of increasingly unhinged messages from Madison that ranged from apologetic to threatening to begging. I turned it on silent and ignored them all. Aunt Patricia texted once, "I'm so sorry you had to grow up that way. I should have said something years ago. You deserved better. I'm proud of who you've become." I responded with a simple thank you and told her I wasn't cutting her off, just my immediate family. She deserved that clarification at least. The next morning, I changed my flight and headed back to Austin early. As the plane took off, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out, the confrontation was over, and I was free. Free from the weight of trying to earn love from people who didn't know how to give it. Free from the silent comparisons and the constant feeling of being less than. Free from the hope that someday things might be different. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter from my parents. It was a long, rambling apology that tried to explain their choices and express their regrets. They wanted to make amends, to be part of my life, to start over. Madison had apparently had a complete breakdown after Thanksgiving and was in therapy. They were in therapy too, trying to understand where they'd gone wrong. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe someday I'd be open to rebuilding something with them. But not today. Not this year. Possibly not ever. The money had changed things, but not in the way they might have thought. It hadn't made me happier. I'd already built a happy life before the windfall. What it had done was give me the freedom to completely walk away without guilt or fear. I didn't need anything from them. I didn't need their approval, their support, or their presence in my life. The financial security meant I could close that door permanently without wondering if I'd regret it later. I donated money to scholarships for first-generation college students. I funded programs for kids from families where one child was clearly favored over another. Yes, that's a real thing, and there are support groups for it. I invested in women's business ventures and tech startups run by people who'd been overlooked by traditional funding sources. My money went to places where it could make a real difference, to people who reminded me of my younger self, struggling and underestimated. Madison sent me an email 6 months later. It was surprisingly self-aware, written from rehab where she was dealing with substance abuse issues, and what her therapist called golden child syndrome. She apologized for her behavior, acknowledged how she'd been raised to see me as less than, and said she was working on becoming a better person. She didn't ask for money or help, which was progress. She just wanted me to know she was sorry. I wrote back briefly, wishing her well in her recovery but making it clear I wasn't interested in rebuilding a sisterly relationship. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. The foundation was too damaged. My parents kept trying for a while, birthday cards with checks I returned, Christmas presents I donated, invitations to holidays I declined. Eventually, the attempts became less frequent. We settled into a distant, cordial estrangement. They were essentially strangers who happened to be related to me by blood. A year and a half after that Thanksgiving disaster, I was sitting in my home office when Aunt Patricia called. Dad had suffered a heart attack. He was stable but had requested to see me. She wasn't pressuring me, just passing along the information. I told her I'd think about it. I did visit him in the hospital, briefly. He looked frail and scared, nothing like the confident man who'd once held me at arm's length while showering Madison with affection. He apologized again, tears streaming down his face. He said he'd spent the past year and a half thinking about all his regrets, and I was at the top of the list. He wanted another chance. I told him I forgave him. And I meant it, not for his sake, but for mine. I didn't want to carry anger anymore. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. I wished him a full recovery, said I was glad he was getting perspective on his life, and left. I didn't come back after he was discharged, and he didn't ask me to. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things turned out with my family. The answer is complicated. I regret that my parents couldn't love both their daughters equally. I regret that Madison was raised in a way that damaged her ability to function as an independent adult. I regret all those years feeling like I wasn't enough. But I don't regret walking away. I don't regret building my own life, my own success, my own definition of family that includes friends who show up for me and care about me regardless of my bank account. I don't regret that Thanksgiving dinner showdown, because it brought everything into the open and gave me permission to stop trying. The $30 million didn't solve my problems or heal my childhood wounds. But it did give me the ultimate freedom, the freedom to choose who gets to be in my life based on how they treat me, not on what I might need from them. And that freedom, more than any amount of money, was worth everything. Madison eventually got sober, finished her therapy, and started working a real job in marketing. She's apparently doing better, according to Patricia, who still keeps me updated on family news. My parents are older now, facing their mortality and grappling with the consequences of their choices. Mom volunteers at a family counseling center, which Patricia says is her way of trying to make amends for her failures as a mother. As for me, I'm still in Austin. I started my own company focused on developing software for nonprofits and social services. I travel when I want, donate generously to causes that matter, and surround myself with people who value me for who I am. I have a partner now, someone who knew me before they knew about the money, and who loves me for the person I became through all those struggles. The story of that Thanksgiving dinner has become almost legendary in my friend group, the time my sister had a complete meltdown because I turned out successful despite being the other daughter. But to me, it's less about the drama and more about the moment I finally stopped waiting for my family to see my worth. I'd already known it all along. I just needed to stop caring whether they ever figured it out. Sometimes the best revenge isn't carefully planned. Sometimes it's just living well, succeeding on your own terms, and refusing to let the people who underestimated you have any power over your happiness. The look on Madison's face when she realized I had everything she thought she deserved? That wasn't why I succeeded. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to watch her understand that the world doesn't owe you anything just because you were told you were special. I built my empire from nothing while she waited for hers to be handed to her. And when the truth came out over turkey and stuffing, surrounded by family who'd enabled it all, I finally got to stand up and walk away knowing I'd done it entirely on my own. No inheritance, no family money, no connections, just hard work, smart choices, and the resilience you develop when you learn early that you're the only person you can truly count on. That's the real story. Not the money, not the meltdown, not the dramatic confrontation. The real story is about a girl who was told she didn't matter and decided to prove that the only opinion that mattered was her own. And in the end, that made all the difference.